This is like my fourth attempt making this video. I really want to get it done before I go to bed. This is something I've been meaning to have published to the internet for a long time, specifically using my real name. So I'm currently looking at a Wikipedia article. It covers the topic of schizoid personality disorder, and I wanted to read little bits and pieces of it because I have been convinced for a few years now that if I can be diagnosed with any kind of mental condition, this would be it. So I'm publishing this video as a way to kind of demystify my fundamental nature to other people who I don't care to explain myself to. Instead, I can just point them to this video. So if I have an acquaintance that I'm not quite comfortable, having an elaborate conversation with about, my lifestyle choices or something, I could just link them to this video. Here you go. Here's why I'm a schizoid and what it means. And yeah, so here we go. Let's start by quoting probably the most important line in the entire article. Donald Winnicott explains, because schizoid individuals prefer to make relationships on their own terms and not in terms of the impulses of other people. Failing to attain that, they prefer isolation. End quote. I've always been a person who would rather be alone than be even slightly uncomfortable but having company. When I was younger, I used to just consider myself to be an introvert, but the stereotype of an introvert is typically someone who merely prefers one-on-one communication. They don't like to be the center of attention. They prefer a small gathering of like-minded individuals versus a crowd of, diverse people to commingle with. That was close to what I believed myself to be, but it doesn't cover it, right? I'm specifically a schizoid, not an introvert, although compared to a normal person, I'm more introverted. But calling myself an introvert doesn't cut to the fundamental. I'm a schizoid. For example, an introvert prefers, who they prefer one-on-one intimate conversation. I do not like that. I do not prefer one-on-one intimate conversations. I'm actually more comfortable public speaking to an audience than I am talking one-on-one with someone. I've never been a shy person, and while introversion isn't characterized by being shy, there's usually a lot of overlap between shyness and introversion, whereas I've never considered myself to be shy. Anytime I've, shrank away from social situations, it's literally been because I find them unpleasant, not because I'm afraid of being seen as awkward or something. So basically, a lot of the particular characteristics of being a schizoid are, they explain a lot of my strange behavior. But to me, it's not strange. I assume to other people it is strange because I have lived my life being regarded as strange and not really understanding why. Obviously, it's other people that are strange to me, but, if everyone else is calling you strange, the common denominator is that you must be the strange one, right? Anyway, I'm going to actually skim to the top of the article and read the verbatim definition of schizoid personality disorder. Quote, often abbreviated as SPD, schizoid personality disorder is a personality disorder characterized by lack of interest in social relationships, a tendency towards a solitary or sheltered lifestyle, secretiveness, emotional coldness, detachment, and apathy. Affected individuals may be unable to form intimate attachments to others and simultaneously possess a rich and elaborate but exclusively internal fantasy world. End quote. I daydream a lot. I deliberately make time in my day to daydream. I essentially describe it as like watching a movie in my head, although I will physically move around. I'll like move around. I'll pace around my room, that sort of thing. It's something I've done since I was like, a kid, and I've never really grown out of it because it's genuinely the way that helps me to think clearly about, I guess, my creative aspirations. But it also does actually help me to think in general, to just be pacing and moving around, and to kind of be acting out, engaging with someone when obviously it's just me thinking out loud. I mean, if I were more comfortable with myself, I would literally talk to myself even when I wasn't recording a video. But the point is, I've always made choices in my life to avoid sort of having a social life. To me, a social life is like a precarious version of getting advice or something. Like, when it comes to making a decision about the kind of life I want to live, my number one option is to, think about what I want and think about it carefully. Whereas a normal person will, like, look to what other people are doing, look into the outside world and kind of gauge, well, other people seem to be doing this, they seem to be happy because of this, so I'm going to do that. And that's just not something I do. And consistently making the choice to, be solitary in my thoughts and thinking style in order to make decisions about how I should live my life, it has, resulted in me being a kind of odd person compared to most people. Also, this idea of secretiveness. I actually think this is the most important aspect of being schizoid. Secretiveness does not mean that you're, like, dishonest. That's not what it means, okay? For someone to be a schizoid, it essentially means that when you were younger, when you were growing up, you were convinced that it was a matter of survival that you withhold information from people, right? So the superficial example would be if you saw someone do something terrible, and then they said, if you tell anybody you saw me do this, I'm going to do something bad to you. And so you kept that a secret that you saw them do that bad thing. And so you now have a mental scar where you have a preference for being very careful about what you tell other people about you, yourself, your environment, because you don't want to inadvertently say something that may reveal that secret that someone threatened you to keep to yourself. Now, I'm not trying to say that in my actual childhood I was literally threatened by anyone into keeping secrets. I'm just saying that for whatever reason, I was made to feel uncomfortable with being explicit and honest with people, in part due to poor parenting and not having a very good home life, not being in a very good situation. And so for whatever reason, again, I can't explain my nature in a few sentences and have you, buy it. But, I have an overwhelming preference to be a very guarded person who is secretive and not willing to disclose everything about my thoughts and feelings to other people. I know that normal people are also like that, but they tend to lie instead of just withhold. So if someone asks me how I'm feeling, right, the reason we have a social ritual of, like, saying, oh, I'm fine, is because it's an acceptable white lie, so that you don't actually have to divulge your actual feelings at any given time, which may be negative and quite a burden on someone else. Now, with me, I'm self-aware that, practicing dishonesty, even when it comes to white lies, it's not mentally hygienic. I don't consider it to be a good thing. So if someone were to ask me how I'm feeling, my impulse is to be honest, and then my second impulse is to be secretive about that honest feeling. And so I begrudgingly decide to be as honest as I can without being explicit. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, a lot of my social style, my style of relating to other people is I never want to be cornered into having to lie when people are trying to divulge my secrets. And my secrets are not necessarily like me up to some nefarious thing. It's just there is information that I'm convinced you don't need to know and will be made worse by knowing, and so I'm choosing not to share it with you, in part because I'm totally selfish and wish to live a life on easy mode where I don't owe people 100% honesty with no boundaries just because they engage me in a particular way. And I think most normal people are actually more comfortable doing that. Like they're willing to open up a lot more easily. Whereas to me, that just seems like, well, it literally feels unpleasant, and everything in my nature tells me not to do it. Right? So I feel like I'm getting lost in the woods. But what I'm trying to say is that, this is fundamentally a huge part of my personality that kind of explains all the other aspects of my personality. Like, the most basic way to understand me is that, I don't like to share information with people unless it's absolutely necessary and a strong case is made that there's an ethical imperative here for me to disclose completely with 100% honesty exactly the information you're asking me about, right? And what that means is, in practice, it means I effectively don't socialize if I can avoid it, right? So I have no real friendships as an adult that aren't based on the inertia of friendships I made when I was in my early teens or something, right? That's why I'm only really comfortable being myself around close family members and friends I've had for years. I don't have the capacity to make new friends as an adult. I don't have the capacity to even begin pursuing a romantic partner. Like, these are just things that I'm literally incapable of doing unless I follow a script that has no overlap with what I would naturally feel like is a thing I should do that makes sense. And so one of the reasons that schizoid people are often typified as like loners is that when you have this nature, you don't have a natural instinct to connect to other people because you're way too guarded and secretive and distancing and averse to intimacy. And there really is no way around it, right? But I do want to get to a part of the article that is actually kind of fascinating. I'm going to read a whole bunch of shit here. It'll probably only take a few minutes, but this is all under the subheading of Secret Schizoid. Quote, "Many schizoid individuals display an engaging, interactive personality, contradicting the observable characteristics emphasized by the common, symptoms. Guntrip using," okay, that's a guy's name, "classifies these individuals as secret schizoids who behave with socially available, interested, engaged, and involved interaction, yet remain emotionally withdrawn and sequestered within the safety of the internal world." This guy distinguishes between a classic schizoid person and a secret schizoid person, which occurs just as often as each other. He cautions one should not miss identifying the schizoid person as a result of the patient's defensive, compensatory interaction with the external world. He suggests one ask the person what his or her subjective experience is to detect the presence of the schizoid refusal of emotional intimacy and preference for objective fact. End quote. When I was a kid, I was a secret schizoid. As an adult, I'm a classic schizoid. A lot of my friends, well, I don't really have that many friends these days, but most of my friends, when I've gotten them to talk about why they wanted to be my friend to begin with, it's because they found me to be an interesting, entertaining, funny man or something, right? Yeah, I was being a secret schizoid. Like, I was being superficially outgoing and extroverted because that was a way for me to keep people at an emotional distance, because they would essentially be engaging a clown, not the real me. And just as I grew into an adult, I realized, well, this is just too much work. I'm just going to be myself now, which is a boring loner. So that's essentially why I can, like, consider myself to be this ultra introverted person while simultaneously being a person who's not shy, who's comfortable, you know, public speaking, being kind of in my past, being somewhat of a class clown. I would say I roughly became more, like, I became more stereotypically introverted and quiet in roughly 5th grade, with some exceptions. And yeah, basically, this is just the way that I can explain myself easily, is like, just read the entire article on schizoids on Wikipedia. Like, oh, and by the way, there's no cure for this. I would almost argue that it's not even a mental disorder, because there's nothing disorderly about having this temperament, right? Like, I'm still able to have a job, hold a job, I can pay bills, I can socialize, I just hate the feeling of doing it. You know, I can hold a conversation with someone, I can be comfortable in a social, you know, situation. I can go, but why would I do any of these things when I derive no pleasure from them? See, that's the thing. As a schizoid, you're like hyper picky. You're so picky about the company you keep that you literally would rather just be alone, because nobody is better than your own company. And a thing I've overlooked, actually, when it comes to being a schizoid, is I haven't emphasized enough this quality of having a rich and elaborate but exclusively internal fantasy world, or at least, you know, having an inner life full of daydreams that is kind of always constantly going, unless you deliberately make the choice to focus on what you're doing, which is obviously what I have to do. Okay, that is why I find a fairly normal physical labor job to be one of my favorite jobs I've ever had, because if I had some kind of, you know, more intellectual job, if I had a job that was more dependent on my ability to communicate and engage people and problem solve using my mental faculties rather than just getting something done that I'm tasked with, if I had that kind of job, which is stereotypically considered to be, oh, if you're an intellectual type, if you're a smart guy, if you're a thoughtful person, you should try to have a job like that. Yeah, I can't do that, because I will only think about my daydreams and my own pet interests. I won't care about the job. The only way for me to successfully keep a job and enjoy doing it and stay focused on it is if the tasks are relatively simple. You know, I have to accomplish A, B, C, and D within a certain time frame, so I can, you know, determine the time that I spend doing certain tasks, with the goal that at the end of the day, certain things are done. So, like, I can be a bit explicit here. Like, basically, my job currently is basically that of a janitor, right? And it's my preferred form of work, because I don't know, it's just appealing. It's essentially easy work. It can be physically taxing. It can be tedious depending upon the nature of what I'm having to deal with at any given time. But, you know, it pays the bills. I'm not a person who's starved to have an enjoyable ritual associated with the way that I make money. I just care that I'm making enough money to pay my bills, to have large structures of what the fuck is the word? large blocks of unstructured free time. That is the thing I value in life the most, because I spend it daydreaming, working on creative projects, and engaging with material online that I find interesting, like, looking up things, learning about the world, getting into philosophy, getting into weirder things that don't really have a lot of utility for career and stuff, unless I decide to be some kind of entrepreneur in a creative field, which is not likely, but I'm never going to dismiss it as a possibility, because, I'm somewhat ambitious, but my own nature holds me back. My own nature as a hyper-ultra introvert, which is just a fancy way of saying, schizoid. Another thing I find fascinating about this, it's not quite true of my life, because I don't consider myself to be living in poverty, but apparently, let me just... Alright. Okay. Let's see... Okay. Quote, some critics, such as such and such of such and such university and such of such and such university, argue that the definition of SPD is flawed due to cultural bias, and that it does not constitute a mental disorder but simply an avoidant attachment style requiring more distant emotional proximity. I largely agree with that, by the way. Quote, if that is true, then many of the more problematic reactions these individuals show in social situations may be partly accounted for by the judgments commonly imposed on people with this style. However, impairment is mandatory for any behavior to be diagnosed as a personality disorder. SPD seems to satisfy this criterion only because it is linked to negative outcomes. These include a significantly compromised quality of life, reduced overall functioning even after 15 years, and one of the lowest levels of life success of all personality disorders, measured as status, wealth, successful relationships. End quote. So obviously, I consider myself to be someone who is unlikely to have a successful romantic relationship, and I also consider myself to be someone who is never going to have a high status in terms of career and wealth accumulation. I admire those things intellectually. I do consider it overall an achievement to have a rewarding romantic relationship and a family and kids and stuff. I also admire people who are good at their job and have a high career and have a command of wealth because the service they provide to the world is so desired that people will pay them a lot of money to perform what they do. I admire all that stuff. I just don't really care to pursue it myself because it seems like a bother. It seems like a chore. And given the nature of a lot of careers these days, the social component, the networking component, the keeping a certain behavioral model to yourself and, kind of supplicating to people's whims in order to really be a successful business person if you're providing your own service, those are all things I have a particularly hard time doing as a schizoid, which is partly why I work as a janitor. Here are the tasks that need to be completed before the day is over. Make sure they get done. You have this much time. Here are the tools you need to do it. Everything's very simple. It's very straightforward. I can leave work on a given day at the end of my shift knowing that I did my job. It was of value to someone, of the company, whatever. And I can't think of the word. I'd love to be an entrepreneur involved in some kind of creative work, but the problem is I'm not willing to compromise on my own artistic vision for what kind of art is worth making, what kind of things are worth putting out into the world, and, So I wouldn't exactly be an ideal candidate for working collaboratively when it comes to anything, creative or anything artistic, because I want to selfishly do things my way on my own time as a hobbyist, doing it for reasons of cathartic enjoyment. And then the way I pay my bills would be to do simple physical labor. And that's how I'm living my life right now. So when I read that quote from the article like a minute or two ago, it talked about how you can't really consider schizoid personality disorder to be a disorder if the only rubric for making it a disorder is having low life success, because I'm literally comfortable with having low life success if the definition of low life success is not having a romantic partner, not having successful relationships, and not having a lot of wealth. Those things don't interest me. The only thing I'm interested in is staying comfortable. I'm not averse to hard work. I'm averse to a specific kind of work that requires my emotional and intellectual labor. So paradoxically, I'm actually very comfortable doing quote-unquote demanding physical labor because it's not demanding in the most important respect for someone like me, which is demanding my emotions, demanding my intelligence, demanding my problem-solving ability to bear on someone else's issue, which I might not even respect the fact that they have that as an issue, right? So, I definitely am not making this video in order to diagnose myself for the purpose of curing myself one day. I'm literally making this video because it demystifies anything a normal person would find mysterious about me. And I guess that's really all I wanted to achieve with this video. I don't know if I succeeded, but, let's just glean over the subheading in the article that talks about psychotherapy, because I have been to therapy before, and after doing it for about a year, because I kind of realized, this is costing me a lot of money. I don't think I should keep doing this for much longer. And the benefits were quickly diminishing the longer I did it, so I decided to just stop. But I do consider my year of therapy to have been helpful. I now consider myself mentally equipped to be my own therapist. I don't consider that to be presumptuous. Like, I'm actually pretty good at sorting through my emotions and stuff. The fact that I'm making this video is a pretty good example, I would hope. But anyway, I just want to remark on what they have to say about schizoids when it comes to psychotherapy. Man, I'm really thirsty. Quote, despite the relative emotional comfort, psychoanalytic therapy of schizoid individuals takes a long time and causes many difficulties. Schizoids are generally poorly involved in psychotherapy due to difficulties in establishing empathetic relations with a psychotherapist and a low motivation for treatment, end quote. Ironically, I was actually very good at this. I explained to my therapist very, very early in our sessions that I feel like this is kind of my personality, so I want you to know I'm deliberately being as honest as I can in the moment. I'm completely talking without a filter. Basically, any good juicy things you would want to bring up to a therapist, I brought up in the sessions within the first month. So effectively, the therapy was really great for the first few months, and then it tapered off with diminishing returns. And by once a year had passed, I'm sort of yeah, I don't think this is worth doing anymore. Basically, what I'm doing with you when I'm talking to you in this chair, I could just do with myself talking to a webcam. So I don't really see the point. And a lot of the feedback I was getting was kind of, I'm not trying to disparage it, but, I felt like a relatively abnormal person compared to my therapist, and so I felt like the feedback they were giving me was, limited because, I mean, it's very rare that someone with a schizoid personality disorder would voluntarily go into therapy, so as a result, my therapist didn't have much experience with people like me. So, the only benefit was early on where I was just open about literally every problem I had. And I was really good at getting to the core of my problems and trying to process, past trauma and make sense of experiences and ways I was treated when I was younger, all that shit. I did a really good job on that, and I'm unironically proud of it. I consider myself to be pretty emotionally healthy compared to other people who have my condition of being a schizoid and also compared to normal people. But anyway, enough patting myself on the back. Let me continue reading this shit right here. Quote, supportive psychotherapy is used as an inpatient or outpatient setting by a trained professional that focuses on areas such as coping skills, which I have in abundance, improvement of social skills and social interactions, with which I'm improving at, not because I lack skills, but because I'm trying to ignore the part of my brain that wants to not do it because I feel it's beneath me or something. Communication and self-esteem issues. People with schizoid personality may also have a perceptual tendency to miss subtle differences in expression. I tend not to miss these. Just saying. That causes an inability to pick up hints from the environment because social cues from others that might normally provoke an emotional response are not perceived. That in turn limits their own emotional experience. The perception of varied events only increases their fear for intimacy and limits them in their interpersonal relationships. Their aloofness may limit their opportunities to refine the social skills and behavior necessary to effectively pursue relationships. End quote. I'm well aware that my social skills are not the best, but I feel like they're at least slightly above average. I just don't make use of them that often because I don't enjoy socializing. So, like, why would I use a skill meant for acquiring an experience I don't enjoy? That destroys the incentive to want to be good at social skills, right? And I don't believe there's this secret plateau I'm unaware of where once I reach a particular skill level, suddenly I'm going to enjoy talking to people. I tend to enjoy engaging ideas, philosophy, all that shit, way more interesting than, like, engaging with someone on an emotional level, even when we're talking about, you know, something quote-unquote deep. But I'm not exactly starved to have deep conversations either. I mean, there's plenty of shit I'm interested in that is really kind of silly and stupid and not at all deep. But anyway. Let's see. Okay, quote. Besides psychodynamic therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy can be used. But because that style of therapy generally begins with identifying the automatic thoughts, one should be aware of the potential hazards that can happen when working with schizoid patients. People with schizoid personality seem to be distinguished from those with other personality disorders in that they often report having few or no automatic thoughts at all. That poverty of thought may have to do with their apathetic lifestyle, but another possible explanation could be the paucity of emotion many schizoids display, which would influence their thought patterns as well. Let me quickly look up that word because I've literally never seen it before in my life. Paucity, what does that mean? Smallness of number, fewness, scarcity, dearth, okay. I can actually relate to that a lot. I've never experienced this idea of having a thought that I don't feel is a part of my brain. Like, that's why I explicitly tried to distinguish myself earlier in this video with, like, you know, schizoid. Isn't that like schizophrenia? No. Schizophrenia is when you have thoughts that you don't attribute to yourself, as if you had like an alternate personality whispering words in your head that had nothing to do with you, and yet you felt compelled to obey or something. Yeah, I've never had anything like that. Like, I have a tight control of my mental real estate, okay? If I have a thought or a notion, I can attribute it to something in me or my past, and it's very clear that it's like, oh, this is a thing that I can deal with. This is a thing that can be sorted out. This is not a mysterious demon from some ethereal plane that I'm not aware of. Like, you know what I'm saying? So, God, that's the only thing that annoys me about being a schizoid is, like, the terminology. Literally, the sound of the word sounds too much like schizophrenic, which has the association of it's literally the stereotype of being a crazy person. So, like, I say to people, oh, yeah, I'm a schizoid, but they hear schizophrenic because that's they don't look up psychology in their spare time. So they hear a word, it sounds like another word, which is the stereotype of a crazy person. So I'm basically telling people, oh, I'm a crazy person a little bit, and I don't want to be telling people that. So that's why I've always been low key about telling people, oh, I'm a schizoid, even though it's the simplest way to explain my nature. It's like, well, the problem is it has the connotation of being, oh, so you're a crazy person? You're a crazy person who hears voices? No, I'm not that. I'm ultra introverted to such an extent that my own company is superior to anyone else's company. I don't know. Anyway, quote, again, more about psychotherapy when it comes to schizoids. Socialization groups may help people with schizoid personality. Ironically, I consider that's what having a job is. You have a job, you have coworkers, you have goals in common, you all benefit from making money by helping the company you work for. That's a great socialization group. Okay. Educational strategies in which people who have SPD identify their positive and negative emotions may also be effective. No thanks. I don't like to share that much with others. Such identification helps them to learn about their own emotions and the emotions they draw out from others, and to feel the common emotions with other people with whom they relate. This can help people with schizoid personality create empathy with the outside world, end quote. I don't feel like I have a dearth of empathy, okay? My empathy is pretty high up there. It just doesn't translate to being nice to people, per se. Like, I can relate to someone who's going through a tough time. That doesn't mean I'm going to go out of my way to, like, relate to them on an emotional level or even to help solve their problem. Because, again, I'm extremely picky. I'm extremely self-interested. Like, I don't derive enjoyment from the company of other people unless there are very specific parameters in place, like a shared interest or a shared goal in the moment of trying to solve a problem, right? That's why I can get along with coworkers easily, but feel like I'm wasting my time if I go to a social event, right? It's why I can be comfortable giving a presentation and feel like a fish out of water in a group of like 3 or 4 other people who are like, you know, talking to each other as friends. It's like, yeah, I don't think I can fit in here. This makes me uncomfortable. I'd rather speak to a stadium of 1,000 people giving a lecture on something. Like, not that I've ever given a lecture, but I have often considered, like, way in the past, I thought, I wonder if I should ever pursue, like, being a teacher of some kind. And then I remembered that most jobs being a teacher are essentially, you know, government jobs, and, you know, I like to avoid working government jobs for reasons I'll get into in a future video. So yeah, you've almost listened to me talk about myself for like almost 40 minutes. Thanks, whoever you are, who I guess you must know me on some level, because this is my real name channel. This is my real name on YouTube channel, so whatever. What's this? I'm trying to find something of interest to read from the Wikipedia article a bit more. Okay, this is interesting. A study comparing personality disorders with Myers-Briggs type indicator types found that the disorder of being a schizoid had a significant correlation with being introverted and thinking preferenced. That's interesting because in the past, when I have taken the Myers-Briggs type indicator, I often get the INTJ result, which I do feel fits me the best, even though that personality type has an overwhelming connotation of being extremely smart. I don't necessarily consider myself to be, like, smart. I just consider myself to have a preference for taking ideas seriously. Like, I care to be precise in my communication because I take ideas seriously, it doesn't really come from a consequence of, oh, I have such a high IQ that of course I'm an intellectual. No, it's just I've always just cared about ideas more than most other things. And so precision of language and being articulate and being properly understood has just mattered to me all the time. And that seems to be in line with, for example, the INTJ type. Though I've also tested as ISTJ, and I even tested INFP once. But anyway, I don't put much stock in the Myers-Briggs type indicator these days. I was kind of infatuated with it as a teenager, but I'm like 30 years old now. That was like more than a decade and a half ago. Yeah, now I'm mostly just interested in like my particular psychotypography, so that I can sort of reach proper individuation and be comfortable in my skin, so much so that I can basically just like not feel like I have to pretend to be someone that I'm not. Because again, I consider even mild forms of dishonesty to be a kind of improper mental hygiene practice that will bite you in the ass in some capacity that you may not be aware of, because again, philosophically, I try to align myself with the truth in any given context because I like to live in reality. I believe in an objective existence. I believe in objective truth. I think that there is a right and wrong in any given situation. I don't think there are grays. There are only blacks and whites. But if you're zoomed out too far away, it looks like it's gray. But if you zoom in, you're going to see there's a chessboard. You're going to see that there's a right and wrong way to do something. Like that's kind of the attitude I have about life and whatever. Now this is getting way off topic, but let's just list off these themes that are associated with being a schizoid type. I'm sorry this video doesn't have enough structure. There's no strong takeaway you can get from any of this, but whatever. If you've ever been curious about what goes on in between my ears, I'm sure this is kind of fascinating, but honestly, I don't like to be thought of as this weird guy who thinks all the time. I like that I am that. I'm not comfortable with other people thinking of me that way because I'd prefer to just be considered like, just some guy who's living his life, not really minding, other people. Anyway, the descriptive tradition for schizoid personality began in 1925 with the observable behaviors below listed as number 1, unsocial ability, quietness, reservedness, seriousness, and eccentricity. I kind of cringe at the prospect of considering myself to be an eccentric, but I'm sure it's inescapable. As self-obsessed as this sounds, I've never met someone more strange than myself. So, unless I've been like read up on someone, pseudo-fameless who is like written about as being particularly strange. And obviously people who literally have mental illnesses. I mean, I don't even consider that to be strange. I just consider that to be dysfunctional. Like, what's wrong with you? Shape up. Like, I'm eccentric. I don't actually have actual problems that are like inexplicable and I don't have anything particularly irrational about me, I don't think, at least compared to most people. Anyways, other schizoid qualities include number 2, timidity, shyness with feelings, sensitivity, nervousness, excitability, fondness of nature and books. I've never been particularly fond of nature. I used to like reading books throughout high school, but I very quickly preferred to just read on the internet, and over time that evolved into consuming YouTube videos and documentaries more than anything. Although occasionally I do read long articles about subjects I'm interested in, but it's because I'm trying to specifically acquire some skill related to my, my hobbies or personal interests, like, programming games or drawing or being a better storyteller, stuff like that. Number 3, pliability, kindliness, honesty, indifference, and silence and cold emotional attitudes. I mean, I guess I identify a lot with that. Other people consider me to be a kind person. I don't necessarily think of myself as a kind person, because to me, kindness belays generosity, and I do not consider myself to be a generous person at all. Anyway, These characteristics were the precursors of the DSM-3 division of the schizoid character into three distinct personality disorders: schizotypal, avoidant, and schizoid. Interesting. Professor such and such himself, however, did not conceive of separating these behaviors to the point of radical isolation, but considered them to be simultaneously present as varying potentials in schizoid individuals. For Professor such and such, the majority of schizoids are not either oversensitive or cold, but they are oversensitive and cold at the same time, in quite different relative proportions, with a tendency to move along these dimensions from one behavior to the other. Okay, that's kind of boring. I don't have anything to say about that, but let me just go over this list here. Four central schizoid themes. I can relate to these ones a lot. I just skimmed read them. Number 1, the need to regulate interpersonal distance as a central focus of concern. That's so me. That's so me. Anyway. Number 2, the ability to mobilize self-preservative defenses and self-reliance. Again, that's another big one. I mean, I don't like to depend on other people. I don't find it appealing. It puts me on the defensive. It makes me anxious to be depending on other people. I mean, I understand that some mechanisms in society, it's like safe to depend on those things. Like, I depend on money. I depend on people to trust the currency and that its value is equivalent to labor you've performed that is worthwhile and generated wealth for somebody. So obviously, you know, if we ever lived in a society where we decide to get rid of money and replace it with, like, I don't know, some kind of socialism or something, I would be scared. I would think the world was becoming a worse place if it were not capitalistic. You know, as a schizoid, I'm very pro-capitalist because rather than deal with, you know, acquiring the means to make my life comfortable through my relationships, I can simply commit to doing tasks for people in exchange for money, which allows me to purchase whatever I need or want. Yeah, capitalism. Or rather, yay, capitalism. It's like a cozy god that looks over me. The free markets. Anyway. Number 3, a pervasive tension between the anxiety-laden need for attachment and the defensive need for distance that manifests in observable behavior as indifference. So the tension between wanting to be attached to people and wanting to keep a distance, that makes me seem indifferent or cold or hard to read. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that's probably true of me again, but I mean, I don't think that can be solved. I'm not going to, you know, make a hard commitment to one mode of being or the other, because whatever personality disorder I have, it just barely qualifies for disorder, because my life is fine. There are problems with it, but I can handle them. There isn't a problem in my life at the moment that I don't feel like I can handle it in some way or another. So, I am vaguely aware that the prospect of staying comfortable is going to become more difficult the older I get, specifically as someone who is limited in their capacity to create relationships and friendships, because, you know, the older you are, the more you kind of depend on other people to help you be comfortable in your old age. So the end point, the end portion of my life will be harder than the average person's, but I'm okay with that because I value my independence that much. Okay, number 4, an overvaluation of the inner world at the expense of the outer world. I actually have contempt for the notion that the inner world is as important as the outer world. For me, the inner world is the purview of philosophy, and philosophy is king. The only reason to wake up in the morning, the only thing that tells you why you should wake up in the morning to begin with, is philosophy. Your life's purpose. Like, what is the purpose of getting up and going to work? What is the purpose of trying to grow into a person who can talk to people easier? What, you know, all these things I've answered through philosophy. I haven't answered them through engaging some mysterious emotion that is common to all people, or some weird bullshit. No, like, I thought about it and I got an answer, an actual hard answer. And when I got that answer, that gave me the confidence to act in this way and not that way. And I try to use my reason. I'm not particularly good at thinking critically, but I have improved compared to when I was a teenager. Now I'm much more of an adult. I take ideas seriously. I think that one's inner life is essentially one's philosophy. And a lot of people go around thinking that philosophy is not important. The problem is that it's not a matter of, do you have a life philosophy or do you not have a life philosophy? It's a matter of, are you aware of what your life philosophy is, or are you unaware? Because if you think you don't have a life philosophy, you're mistaken. You just don't know what it is. The premises of the philosophy that you follow, that determine most of the decisions and preferences you have, well, if you haven't identified what they are because you haven't thought about it, that just means you're unaware of what's driving you as a person. You don't lack a philosophy, you just don't know what your philosophy is. And so you're not able to correct it if it's wrong. You're not able to distinguish where your focus should be, right? This is why I consider myself to most definitely not be anywhere close to having a disorder. Like, no, I think too much to have a disorder, right? Now, I've heard colloquially, oh yeah, there are people who think too much. They think themselves into a corner in an unproductive way. Like, what is it called? OCD or whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called. I don't remember. Obsessive compulsive disorder. I've heard that can manifest as thinking a certain way over and over, where you're like performing strange rituals over and over. I mean, the closest I have to that is the fact that I set aside time in my life to daydream. Because to me, it's an enjoying activity. It's an enjoyable activity. Much in the same way a normal person would sit down and watch TV for an hour, I stand up and daydream for an hour. Like, it helps to fuel my creativity. It's essentially one of the main components of my way of writing stories and creating intellectual property, which I plan to use in my art should I ever become an entrepreneurial creative person in any capacity later on. So to me, it's not an unproductive, weird disorder that's stealing time away from some other thing I should be doing. It's literally something I enjoy doing in my life and I'm going to keep doing. Unless you can convince me there's something far better I should be spending my time on, which is not likely, because if you're listening to this video, you probably don't know me well enough to make that kind of statement, but whatever. So yeah, I think I've basically exhausted this topic. It's pretty extensive. Yeah, again, I apologize for the lack of integration of this video. Like, it's kind of all over the place. It's me talking to myself interspersed with describing myself, interspersed with just general factoids about schizoid personality disorder, but whatever. You get a good sense of, I guess, my thought process and some of my justifications for the way I live my life, so I consider this a worthwhile vlog to have made, and at least sections of it are worth linking to other people should I ever be in a position where someone wants to know more about me, but I'm in no mood to justify myself, so I just go, here, I made a vlog where I talked about my psychometric, mental ability. That's not the right word. I meant to say my psychometric type. Anyway. Yeah, I'm sure I just sound like a crazy person, so I might as well just say thanks for listening. I don't really know what other kind of shit I'm going to put on this channel, but it's definitely going to be weird, long things like this. It's going to be definitely like me talking for a long time about things that I'm comfortable talking about. I'll try to talk about something a little more concrete in the next video, like experiences I have had in the past, or things that I'm interested in that are not overly intellectual and convoluted sounding when you try to verbalize it. Okay, thanks, bye.